Hello, my name is Reva Slone. I'm a math teacher at Johnson Central High School, and in this presentation, I'll be sharing my experience creating a modern classroom. To begin the process, I attended a summer institute and found that there were several things involved in creating a model classroom. The first step was deciding which class I would begin with and what learning management system I would use. The learning management system was pretty easy to decide because my district uses Google Classroom and it's a really nice platform to organize lessons for students. I first thought I would implement the model in my calculus classes, but when the year began, my calculus class was very small, and so I opted to do this in Algebra 2 instead. The process also required me to rethink instructional videos and create some new ones. Most of my videos that were pre-created that I thought I could use had been developed during COVID, some of them during an older flipped instruction grant that I had been a part of, but most of them were much too long. The recommended length for videos is 8 to 10 minutes, and so I had to recreate all of my videos. I also had to revise some of my own ideas about what it meant to publicly share student progress and some of my classroom habits and routines. And I had to decide how I would track student progress. So preparing to modernize the class requires setting up your learning management system. And my learning management system is Google Classroom. You can see over on the left-hand side all the topics within my classroom. And at the top of the page, you can see the progress tracker that tracks students' daily progress and progress within the unit, and also a daily check-in form, which I'll share with you in this presentation. The progress tracker I opted to use does a little bit of automatic updating, and it's twofold. This is the slide that I do most of the work on. It has students' names on the left, their status as far as whether they are behind, ahead, they need to revise, and what lesson they're working on. And then also lesson by lesson, who's mastered and what they need to do. Now the tracker also has another view, and this is the view that I like to display on a daily basis for my students. Notice it doesn't say anything about their grades, but it does say who's behind, who's on pace, who's ahead of pace. It shows that everybody's ahead of pace right now, but this is just because my students just finished a lesson today and they're prepared for the lesson which begins tomorrow. So tomorrow, all of these students that say ahead will just jump over to the on pace column. And then it shows who's working on revisions and whether any students are behind. I also have created a daily check-in, and the first component is just an emotional well-being check, how students are feeling, if they might even want to speak with a counselor, or if they're feeling really great that day. I implemented this just because since COVID-19 started, we've had a lot more of a focus on mental health and how students are doing. There's been some anxiety this year as students return to the classroom, but I wanted to give them a space to kind of communicate that with someone who could possibly help. And then also just helps them think about really whether they're ahead, on pace, or behind, and think about what they need to work on for the day. And then there's a space for them to talk about whether they need to conference with me or not, or just answer yes or no. I think it's a little more comfortable for students if they can answer anonymously and not always have to call me over during class. But they complete this very quickly when they enter the classroom, and then I can do a quick check in a spreadsheet while they are actually getting started on their lesson for the day. Putting the model to work required designing the unit, and so this is a look at one of my units, and you can see that all of the lessons begin with the lesson title, Lesson 3.1, Lesson 3.2, which is a little more important than the name just to help students focus on their primary concern for the day. If you expand any of these lessons, you'll see some helps that I've created for the students. I always attach the video, and then if I use a Jamboard or a PowerPoint for that presentation, I actually include that too so that students can refer back to that and help kind of fill in their notes. You can't really pay attention to the numbers about turned in and assigned because I actually track that through my tracker and through Math Excel and not really on Google Classroom. And we will watch a short video clip from one of my lessons. Back Algebra 2 students. In this video, you will be learning how to solve systems of equations by elimination. The learning targets for this lesson are: I can use elimination to solve systems of equations, I can identify systems that are inconsistent and have no solution, and I can identify systems that are dependent and have infinitely many solutions. Let's go ahead and get started. Step 1 in determining the solution to this system is to multiply one or both equations by a constant to eliminate x or y when the equations are added together. And so we want to go ahead and multiply the first equation by -3. Notice that if I multiply that -3 by the coefficient of x, it produces positive 9x, and when added with with negative 9x, those terms would cancel out. So we'll go ahead and distribute that -3. Gives me a positive 9x minus 21y is equal to positive 48. Remember that you do have to multiply -3 by every term in that first equation. Bring down the second equation. And then we're going to go ahead and add those together. Notice the x's will cancel each other out. I'll have negative 16y is equal to 64. Which brings us to step 2. We want to solve for the remaining variable. Well, in this case, that means we're going to solve for y, and since y is multiplied by negative 16, I divide both sides by negative 16. So y is going to be equal to -4. Once we have found the value of the first variable, that brings us to step 3. And we want to substitute to determine the value of the variable that we initially eliminated. So I can choose to substitute in either equation. I will go ahead and substitute back into the first equation, -3x plus 7 times the value of y that I now have is equal to -16. So simplifying, I have 3x minus 28 is equal to -16. We'll add the 28, leaving us -3x is equal to 12. And then we divide by -3, and we find that x is also equal to -4. The last step is to check our solution in both equations to be sure that that's accurate. So in the first equation, so I stopped that video just a little early. The video actually ended up being about 9 minutes long for this lesson. After students have watched the video, the next step is to provide practice. And for my students, this means that they're going to work within Math Excel, which is a really great program that we have. It gives them instant feedback about whether their answers are correct. There's a lot of different helps that they can get, including seeing a similar problem, working through a problem step by step with guidance from the computer system. And when they finish that, then they are ready to complete a mastery check. And so you can see this is lesson 3.2a mastery check, and I just use different letters to keep track of the different versions because you do have to have several different versions. After students complete the mastery check, then we decide that if they need to revise or if they are ready to move on to the next lesson. Reflecting on this process myself, how am I doing? Well, there are still some things that I could work on. I'm definitely doing a much better job of creating instructional videos that meet the needs of my students. I have a really good system in place to track their progress. I would like to work a little bit more on the self-paced nature, although I'm doing okay with it and I've made big strides. I kind of get a little behind them. Some of the students that could work ahead are waiting on me sometimes just because I do teach 5 different classes in a 7-period day. And so it's difficult to stay ahead of the game when I'm trying to do this model in several classes. Students are really enjoying the process. They enjoy being able to work ahead on their own. Some of them will even work ahead at home, and then they'll use their class time to do some other things. I worried initially that this would create a classroom where there was chaos and students weren't really on task, and maybe they were being a little wild and driving me nuts, but that's not actually been the case. If students aren't working on something for my classroom, then they are accomplishing other tasks that they need to get done. And I think that's really good. What are my next steps? Well, my next steps are just to continue the process. I'd like to implement it in other classes. Hopefully next year I'll have some videos created ahead and I can allow students to actually self-pace, which is another great point to mention. Self-pacing is not necessarily for the whole year. It's a great idea to have checkpoints built in where you kind of get everybody back together. And so that's what I do when I'm ready to have a unit test. And we start each new unit with all students in the same place.